A very good afternoon. These are the top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Thames Water in trouble. The UK's biggest supplier reveals a 40% spike in sewage incidents as the regulator prepares to announce how much bills can increase. Also ahead, the failed attempt by Rupert Murdoch to shape the future of his media empire. Craft breweries see a jump in sales as Guinness announces a limited supply to pubs over the festive periods. Plus, forking out for the Christmas dinner, while the all-important meal will be 6.5% more expensive this year. Very good afternoon on this Tuesday, Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Thanks for your company. It's been described as the real-life succession battle. Rupert Murdoch has failed in a bid to change his family trust to hand over his media empire to his oldest son, Lachlan. Currently, the trust passes control of the company equally among Mr Murdoch's four oldest children, Prudence, Elizabeth, Lachlan and James. Well, let's get more on this with Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of The Sun. Very good afternoon to you, Kelvin. First of all, what's your take on the decision that court in Nevada has taken?
Well, personally, I found it bizarre, frankly. I mean, the truth about the matter is that Rupert Murdoch is the Da Vinci of the media, a really incredible guy. And he's coming to the court and he's saying to them, rather than having, when I'm dead, a battle between my four children over who runs the company, right? What we're saying is, well, I want to put Lachlan in charge because he's a conservative and he understands how best to handle the assets. Wall Street Journal, Fox News, the idea, and the trouble is that James is very woke and the other children don't have anything to do with the running of the company. James was defined in his evidence by Lachlan as the one that was causing all the trouble involved. Anyway, the situation now is that if it stays like this is, the minute that Rupert dies, all the major shareholders, his children, will fight over it and possibly it gets sold. So anything could happen, including Rupert Murdoch deciding to sell the company, were he to lose the appeal on this judgment, to sell the company himself while he's alive, not waiting for his children to fight over it once he's dead. It's a really incredible business proposition right now.
And Kelvin, is it fair to say that in many ways kind of Fox News is at the centre of this? You talked about Lachlan there. Clearly, Rupert Murdoch wants to essentially have him take over because he wouldn't change the business fundamentally. Sure. My question is, whatever one's political views are, Fox News is an incredible business asset that generates billions of dollars of revenue every year. Why would any of his children change it?
Well, the truth about the matter is that James Murdoch, right, actually is very woke and was very critical of Fox News's output publicly, even when he was within the family business. Now he's sitting on the outside. He's thinking to himself, this could be a successful news business, but it doesn't have to be so Trumpish, right? Of course, it would be a disaster. James, okay, has he been successful since he's left the Murdoch empire? No. And would he have been successful if he hadn't been a Murdoch and had been given $2 billion in tax-free money by his magnificently clever father? I would say that it was a massive question mark, as it is against all the Murdoch children, right? There has been one Rupert Murdoch, there will not be another one, and these kids should just thank their lucky stars that they were nepos, because otherwise the chances of getting work would have been a lot tougher, as it is for everybody else outside the Murdoch sphere.
I get the impression, Kelvin, you're not a big fan of any of them, which may be fair enough. Let's talk about Elizabeth, though, because apparently she is, in some ways, trying to be not the power broker, but trying to smooth things over here. Is that true?
Yeah, she is. She is a nice woman, diplomatic. By the way, has tremendous dust-ups with her father, so don't get the suggestion that she's some shy, retiring little flower in the corner. She knows how to fight her corner. But in the end of the day, it's James Murdoch which is causing most of the trouble. None of these children are, with the exception of Lachlan, are involved in the running of the business. And Lachlan right, he's yet to be tested, but the stock price is quite high. Profitability is looking slightly better. So, I can't understand why the children wouldn't allow it to happen. They think it's their legacy. They've already picked up 2 billion tax-free. What else do they want for being a Murdoch? They should be enormously grateful they were born with that name and just get on with their lives. Fantastic lives that they are.
OK, and just finally, Kelvin, you and I'm sure you've seen Succession. Should I be watching that programme again and going, this is what it's really like? This programme is actually quite reflective of this family drama.
Yes, there's a lot of it in there. And there were some aspects of it that I was astonished that actually got in there. And in fact, Jerry Hall, who was Rupert's fourth wife, had to sign as part of her divorce agreement that she wouldn't contribute any ideas towards the producers and directors of any future succession. How incredible. Honestly, it's fantastic. It's very enjoyable. If you work for the News Corp company, it's fantastic because the whole company is centred around what does Rupert want. The whole company.
Yeah, I suppose on that point, sorry, and this will have to be the final question. In essence, isn't that the problem that actually, whenever he moves, whenever he passes away, the company kind of falls apart, doesn't it? Because it is so much about Rupert Murdoch, and frankly, always has been.
Well, he is retired now. He is 93. Actually, that's probably a load of old cobblers because I know he's on the phone here, there, and everywhere, and nothing can happen really without his say-so. But the great thing for the shareholders is the minute he drops dead, the shares will go through the roof because something big will happen. So if I were Rupert, I would stymie my children by flogging the company while I was alive, rather than waiting for them like vultures to pick over it once he was dead. OK, Kelvin, fascinating as always, and fun, it must be said, talking to you this afternoon. Kelvin Mackenzie there, former editor of The Sun, on the Murdoch saga. Thank you, Kelvin. Let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the day's news now. And Google has unveiled a computing chip capable of solving problems at lightning speed. At the moment, quantum computers exponentially create errors, but the new chip from Google, called Willow, can actually reduce the numbers of errors exponentially. The technology is still, it must be said, though, in its experimental stage. There are warnings that flights to and from Scotland's busiest airport could be affected over the festive season due to strike action. North Air fuel tanker drivers based at Edinburgh are planning to walk out for almost 3 weeks in a dispute over pay. The industrial action led by Unite Union will begin next Wednesday and is not due to end until the 6th of January. Now, the average Christmas dinner will cost you 6.5% more this year, according to new data. The sharp rise is thanks to hefty price rises on turkeys, potatoes, cauliflower, carrots, and even parsnips. A little earlier, I spoke to Fraser McCaffrey. He's a retail analyst who carried out the research and told me, though, it's not necessarily all bad news.
There is some better news when you look at more general grocery price inflation. That's only running at about 2.6%. So the costs are being particularly loaded on the Christmas dinner. But there is some good news. The most promoted category in the supermarket is sparkling wine. So if you do want a bottle of champagne to wash your turkey down, that is where you can look for some savings.
And you can get more on how much your Christmas lunch is going to cost you, or Christmas dinner, on our Money blog. Just scan the QR code that's on your screen now. OK, we're going to pause here on Business Live. I'm going to take a quick break. Coming up next, we'll be talking about craft beer and also about Thames Water. Plus, we'll be looking at the markets. The FTSE down nearly 1% today. All the details in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion. It's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States. It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks, they're taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
Yes.
Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Slightly minutes, slightly better. Slightly minutes, slightly better.
Very welcome back. Let's talk now about Thames Water. The UK's biggest supplier has revealed a 40% spike in sewage spills. Thames Water's boss, Chris Weston, has said eliminating all pollution incidents in the company's network will be almost impossible, and that a public debate is needed about the real cost of ending all sewage outflows. It comes as the wider industry is set to find out next week how much firms can raise bills for customers over the next 5 years. Let's speak to Hugo Llewellyn, CEO of the Social Infrastructure Fund manager, Newcore Capital. Hugo, very good afternoon to you. I mean, first of all, can we all agree that, you know, this is an absolute mess? A lot of people are very angry about it, not just at Thames, but it feels in the entire water industry. What, in your view, has gone wrong here?
Well, it's a very good question, Darren. So thanks so much for having me on the thing. I think the roots of this stem from quantitative easing and the bailout of 2009-10, which hasn't yet unwound. And what we're seeing now is a parallel situation to the banks and fund managers of that time that got bailed out. And the big mess, as you rightly say, and it's sort of exactly the right phrase, for Thames Water has come about because of over-leverage, under-investment, and not having having a view to the future, to the long-term sustainable future. So this all needs to change in infrastructure in the future, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned for infrastructure managers and, of course, the assets that they have the responsibility for running.
And Hugo, isn't that your estimation, meaning that essentially, the current form that Thames Water is taking, the current leadership of Thames Water, is just not fit for purpose?
I'm more focused about capital structures, Darren. I think the architecture of Thames Water and other economic and social infrastructure companies that are over-levered and were run for the short term, perhaps, has led to this issue. I think the existing management teams who are in place have a very difficult job of raising capital with a number of different stakeholders, whether it's the equity investors who have lost their money, a lot of the bank investors who will have to take a haircut, and of course the wider stakeholders, customers, the environment, environmentalists as well. It's a nightmare for them to deal with. So I think the wider blame is about the capital structures that are in place for these critical infrastructure companies, and that needs, in my view, to be regulated so that it can't happen again. You shouldn't have 80% leverage in an economic infrastructure company.
But I suppose the question is, I get your point. You're essentially trying to say, why would anyone invest in the water industry at the moment when essentially it is such a mess, there's no clear way out, and you've got a lot of angry customers and bad publicity. I get that, but at the same time, how do we get out of that vicious cycle, if you like? Because at the moment, to me, there's no obvious path apart from massive government intervention, which the government seem very unwilling to do.
There is a path, and that is to accept that, let's take Thames Water, that the genuine enterprise value of that business is much lower than the people who have invested a higher number say it is. And so let's say you have £1 billion a year of free cash flow from the operating business of supplying clean water and collecting wastewater and sewage. If you then say, well, half of that money needs to go into capex and future-proofing, and the other half of it, leaving a bit for working capital, obviously, can go for dividends for shareholders. That is a much more sustainable structure. And it's critical to look at it like that. And I think that's what new investors coming in will be looking at. But of course, that is not great for the current incumbents of the capital structure.
Yeah.
And there is pressure on the regulator and on the government to put bills up.
Okay.
But putting bills up materially is akin to the bailout that happened in 2009. It's a socialisation of losses, and no sort of penalties to those who have put us in this position.
OK, Hugo, really appreciate that. And of course, we're going to find out what decide to do next week. But Hugo Llewellyn from New Core Capital, thank you very much indeed. Let's talk about beer next, because craft breweries are reporting a huge surge in demand after the owners of Guinness and other stout brands announced supplies to pubs in Britain will be limited in the run-up to Christmas. So what's caused this shortage? Let's speak to John Hobday, Chief Executive Chairman and co-founder of a big brand that we're going to talk about in a second, if we can, John. But I first do want to talk to you about Guinness. There's been a lot of coverage in the last couple of days about shortage of supplies. Question is, and it's not just Guinness, stout in general, but Guinness in particular seems to become insanely popular over the last year or so. Why?
It's a good question. I think it starts back before COVID. There was a bit of a surge in porters, and I think coming out of COVID, it's one of those dark beers are one of those ones which you can't really replicate very well at home. Everyone wants a perfect pint, and I think they work really well on social media as well. And I think the general customer is looking to get back to maybe some historical roots, and instead of drinking lagers perhaps as the mainstay, if you go back 200 years, places like London were the brewing capitals of the world, and everyone was drinking stout and porter.
They were. So there has been a resurgence, hasn't there? And as I say, it's not just Guinness. I'm looking at your cap, London Black. It is other stouts as well, including your brands. Beyond marketing, why are people re-embracing stouts?
Well, as I say, I think there's a connection to the past which is becoming more and more important to people. I think we may be seeing a bit of a revival of a lot of traditions in this country, for better or worse. And I think maybe dark beer can be one of the better ones.
And what's leading to this kind of, this limit on supply? Is it just miscalculation about how much people do want to consume?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. As you grow bigger, it doesn't take with so many outlets. And to give your viewers an idea, we're a brewery. Anspach and Hobday is a brewery with about 600,000 litres production capacity. Guinness, as I understand, is about 6.3 billion litres. So they're huge. And if they have a big swing in demand, it must be hard to do. That said, our brewery's up on sales of London Black 70% year on year. And that was before the drought had happened. I think Guinness, I'm not sure what their percentage is, but it's probably a much smaller amount, and ultimately all these problems scale. So it's not easy for us either, even if it's a tiny drop in the ocean.
And I have to say, it's not just pubs, it must be said. We know that supermarkets are seeing quite substantial sale increases too. Is this something that you're just seeing, in the UK and Ireland, or is this kind of boom in stout taking place elsewhere in the world too?
I think some of it is because Guinness was the last monopoly on the big beers. There was not really a good challenger. For us, with London Black, we're actually now we sell it to Belgium, we sell it to Denmark, France, Italy. We've got interest in China. I think there's a real interest in London Porter, and that, of course, if you go back to the heritage of Guinness, Arthur Guinness came to London to learn how to brew porters that he then took back to Ireland. So I think there was an open market there for a small producer to come in, and I think we've de-risked it, and we've encouraged a lot of other good breweries to have a go at nitro beers, which of course London Black is, and that gives it that creamy mouthfeel, which is what we associate with Guinness.
Yeah, it's weird. As an Irishman, I'm not actually there you go. I'm not actually a big fan of Guinness myself, or indeed a stout. But good luck with your venture, because clearly millions of people are big fans. John, really appreciate your time this afternoon. That's John Hobday. Thank you. OK, let's have a look at the markets on this Tuesday. And in the US, they haven't budged much at all as traders digest a year-end rally to record levels while awaiting US inflation figures that are due to be released this week. In Europe, markets are trading a little lower, retreating from yesterday's mostly positive trading sessions as investors await, again, also US inflation figures. Here in London, the FTSE is down just under 1%, as you can see, down 0.86%. If we have a look at the currencies, the pound also down a little bit of a fraction. Oh, it's actually gone up now against the dollar at 128 and also against the euro at 121. And finally, if we look at oil, it's ticked up a little today, up 0.72%, but still pretty stable all round. Janet Mooey is head of market analyst at RBC Brewin Dolphin. Janet, good afternoon, as always. And as I say, you look at what's happening, particularly when it comes to the United States and these inflation figures. It does seem that the market is awaiting some big decisions and big information on interest rates and on inflation.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Yes, obviously tomorrow we have the U.S. inflation report, and market is expecting a slight pickup in the headline inflation. But generally speaking, I think if there's no big surprise, I don't think there would be a huge market reaction, because I think what we see from recent trend is that inflation has slowed notably, and there is not much variation around that inflation number. So unless we get a big surprise, I don't think the market will change the expectation that the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rate next week. Okay. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
Let's talk about China. We've talked a lot about China over the last couple of months and their attempt to try and stimulate growth. Are there signs that the market are starting to think it might work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's still a lot of skepticism going on with regards to the stimulus in China. Obviously, there has been big announcements since September, which boosted the Chinese stock market. But then the rally didn't last too long. There was a lot of fatigue in the rally because there are doubts. I think this week, the Chinese government made a very significant change in their language, as in they say monetary policy will be moderately loose in 2025. And that's significant because so far for the past 14 years, the official guidance was prudent. So that's a big change. And I think it lays the groundwork for potentially more fiscal stimulus, more spending in the economy, more boost directly to consumer. But we don't know the detail yet, and there's still another big meeting going on, which is the Central Economic Work Conference. So we'll hear more about that. I think market will still trade around these sentiments around stimulus.
OK, Janet, we are going to have to leave it there. Short and sweet, I'm afraid, on this Tuesday afternoon. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, Janet Murray there. OK, that is it from me on Business Live for today. We're back again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it is the News Hour with Mark and Yalda, with all the latest, of course, on Syria. Do stay tuned for that. And I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.